talk top 10 lessons learned in implementing Google Analytics. And let's start off with a quick introduction. Josh.
Hey everybody, nice to meet you all. So my name is Josh Loxton, and I'm the Associate Director of Digital Marketing and Fundraising at Chorus International. And I've been with Chorus International for 6-7 months at this point. I actually come from a B2B background, so it's been really interesting to kind of figure out how to transfer those skills into the nonprofit world.
Awesome. Hey, my name is Joe Hallisey. I'm a senior consultant at Zuri Group. Been there for about 1.5 years, and I specialize in Engage Networks and Google Analytics, anything analytics really. And before I was at Zuri Group, I was at Mercy Home for Boys and Girls, which is an Engaging Networks client. So pretty familiar with the software and love to talk about it. All right. So you want to talk a little bit about Chorus?
Yeah, so I wanted to just kind of explain what Chorus is. I'm not going to read this slide because it's a bit of a nightmare, but Chorus International is essentially a umbrella brand that unites a number of different brands, including Lutheran World Relief, Chorus World Health, IMA World Health, and some other smaller brands. It's meant to kind of bring these groups together so that we can play on each other's strengths and shore up weaknesses, and really our focus is international, so it's across the world, doing relief work, doing climate change work, doing economic development, impact investing, you name it, we probably have a hand in it somewhere. So very complicated brand situation, and I think we'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah, so first we want to start off with a quick case study on Chorus's transition to Engaging Networks and Google Analytics 4. And so basically, Josh, you could jump in at any point, but pretty much around fall of last year, Chorus decided they want to make a wholesale shift from Classy to Engaging Networks. And we're hoping to do it before the giving season, but decided, thankfully, on rolling it out a little bit later. But wanted to give you some numbers on kind of how complex this was that we had to go for. So Chorus has 4 different brands that we were transitioning onto the platform. The primary brand, Chorus International, Lutheran World Relief, Chorus World Health, and their symbolic giving site, Gifts of Love. So not only were we having to deal with just one set of creatives, we had 4 different sets of creatives, 4 different sets of brand standards, most of them are the same, but a little bit different, and making sure that we could isolate and track each one of those. In addition to that, 2 payment gateways with sustainers are still in the process of getting migrated. I mentioned the Gifts of Love e-commerce platform was transitioning off of Capella.
Yes.
Capella, yeah. And the donation forms off of Classy, and Chorus has over 100 donation forms that they had active at the time when you started, and you might be getting, you're still doing a lot, right?
Yeah, we still have that many at any given time.
Email marketing from a different platform that was transitioning over to Engaging Networks, a huge amount of marketing automation, and wanting to sync with Razor's Edge through Omatic. So I think you have the sync starting from Engaging Networks to Omatic, right?
Yes.
And then we're still working on the sync to from.
Yes, we want to get a 2-way sync in place where the Razor's Edge database is basically the same as what's in Engaging Networks, but we're still working through some of that.
So it's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, very complicated, and we really wanted to get this right, and one of the key pieces of this was how do we track success? How do we understand when we launch a campaign in Engaging Networks, when somebody makes a donation, where did they come from across all these brands? Did they move from Chorus International to Lutheran World Relief? Did they move in the other direction? And all of this is something that was enabled by Google Analytics 4, which happened to be the platform that was transitioning from Google Analytics 360. So it made sense to do both transitions at the same time, Google Analytics 4 and Engaging Networks all in one big package.
It was actually a great time to do it because you were just getting to roll out to your go live, and it was that July 1st deadline that you had for UA. So perfect timing to be able to get everything done at one point. So talking about that GA4 migration, echoing a little bit, it was kind of a quick process as well. So the way that Zuri Group launched this is we started out with an audit and cleanup of all of Chorus's old Google Tag Manager containers. So through the process, and Josh was newer to the organization, it was a good discovery session for him and for the rest of his team to look at everything that they had in their containers and say, are we still using this tracking tag? Yes, no, not sure. We did a whole spreadsheet categorization of everything to say, all right, we're gonna keep this, we're not gonna touch this, let's pause this, and kind of get them started on a baseline for getting a good inventory going forward. The next thing we did is we talked about goals and requirements with the Chorus team. So what were their hopes and dreams for tracking their pages? Where were the pain points that they've heard from donors, and what would they like to set up now so they have that data for the future? So with that, we translated that into a system design and schema so we could lay out all the different data layers that we wanted to do across their different donation forms and advocacy forms. So this is an example piece of code, a very quick script for begin checkout. I don't have the full script up here, but as an example, we have this firing after someone adds their first name, last name, and their donation amount on the donation form. So this gives a good indication of when someone actually has read through the content of the page and they're ready to start making that donation. So in terms of the actual implementation, with the challenges of the 4 brands, we had to take into account a ton of different containers that they had and how the organization wanted to divvy up things in the future and make sure that they had good control over it and management with their other agency partners. So we settled on 5 GA4 properties, which we'll talk about in a little bit more, 1 for each brand, and then a roll-up. We had 8 GTM containers, 4 web containers, and 4 server containers. And then every page on their Engaging Networks platform has at least 5 events. So these are kind of the standard ones that we added to all of them. But some had more, so like the e-commerce platform had a few more steps for add and remove from cart. And through Engaging Networks, we were able to pull out a bit over 35 different variables from the system to be able to populate into the Tag Manager container. So there is a ton of information that Engage Networks exposes to you, or you're able to pull out through code after a donation or a advocacy action has been completed.
Yeah, and I just want to mention the server-side integration was a key piece of this. We really wanted the best data, the cleanest data, and the best way to do that, Zuri guided us to think about having a server-side instance of our Google Tag Managers so that we could process our own data and not run into restrictions in terms of like cookie policies and stuff like that.
So here we're going to get into kind of the heart of what this presentation is all about, top 10 tips that we've learned through this process. We have a few QR codes in here, so if you want to take some scans, get your phones out. If not, we'll have this deck. I'm sure they're going to send out the deck afterwards. All right, so we talked a little bit about this in the beginning, but if you have more than 1 brand, think about a roll-up property as a replacement for your Universal Analytics views. So as an example of this, on the side of the screen I've listed out 5 different properties, 1 for each of their brands, and then I have a roll-up titled Zero All Chorus GA4. What that does is it pulls in all of the data that we have in each of those other properties, but the other properties on there only are attached to that specific domain or set of domains relating to that brand. That way, Josh and his team can very quickly go in and create some ad hoc reports as needed by their leadership, or set up some specific dashboards that only relate to one part of the organization and not the other. And that's kind of the benefit of having those segmentations, but for the positives with the roll-up, you can pull in all your reporting together so you can have a wider holistic view of all your web traffic across different parts of your organization, and better understand how channels might be working. So an example would be if Chorus has an email newsletter and they've got links for a whole bunch of different domains, and they're using the same tracking code for each. How did that perform in aggregate compared to just for one brand or another?
Yeah, and being able to see cross-site traffic, because we often link from our main Course International page to LWR, and then LWR links somewhere else. So seeing that flow in Google Analytics was really important to us, so that's why we implemented the all Chorus rollup.
All right, advocate for GA4 terminology instead of continuing to use UA terms. I know that UA has been around for a long time. It's the way that people talk about Universal Analytics is kind of stuck in the minds of those who have been using it for quite some time. But GA4 is a whole new beast, and with a new platform, we always recommend to our clients start coaching the rest of your team into the new lingo. Help get everyone transitioned off of the expectation of what they've been doing in Universal Analytics and say, that's not what the industry is doing anymore. We're talking about how GA4 labels this now. So I think that helps get people away from the old way of doing things, is to just focus on the new terminology. And one of the ways that that's helpful, especially if you're working with a wide team, is to create an internal glossary or a dictionary for all the different terms that you use. So you don't have to keep explaining to your VP what hits are and what's a session and things. Like, you can just say, hey, it's this thing that we talk about all the time. This is kind of a little inside trick. Those of you who are kind of on the more technical side and you're trying to troubleshoot user experience or wondering how your validators are doing on your donation forms, GA4 has a specific event called exceptions that allows you to track that within that platform. So what you can do, so here's an example of a form. Anytime that one of those error messages is shown, you can actually pass that data back to GA4 and start looking in aggregate at the user experience and say, oh, I'm getting a lot of people that are getting an address validation error. What's going on there? Are we people putting in too long? So you can really focus up on your user experience and your understanding of what challenges might be that you have on the platform. Especially if you don't get good data from your donors directly and they just say there's problems with your donation form or something, which they'll never tell you exactly what it is. So this is one way to take a look at that. Another technical tip is page JSON is your friend. So does everybody know about this topic? Brian? Yeah. All right, so I see some hands. So this is buried a little bit in Engaging Networks support site, but if you enable reference transactions on your account settings, every time an Engaging Networks page loads, in the header, there's going to be a line that starts with page JSON, and what it's going to do is it's going to produce a whole bunch of great little pieces of data for you that you can expose and pull that out and to use into other platforms like GA4. So, if you aren't hugely, if you're not a coder, if you don't know a ton about setting this stuff up, this is a really great way to pull out like the most basic necessities of what you might need to set up different events in GA4. So some of the pieces of information that are available right off the bat are the amount, the donation log ID, so the transaction ID. They also have the gateway transaction ID, the internal page name, whatever you call it on the back end for yourself, the payment types, the supporter ID, and if it's a recurring donation or not. So that, I think, gives you a pretty good chunk of information to start tracking those conversions in GA4 or in other platforms as well. And one more technical thing, code blocks have a 4,000 character limit. So has anybody run into this challenge before? Brian? Yeah, okay. Yeah, a few people. All right, so if you are coding up your own data layers and other things, that's something that you have to watch out for. So really try to keep your code simple. consider splitting it between more than one block. I know that's a pain if you want to go that way. Alternatively, you could move your code to a JavaScript file. And thank you, Engage Networks, for increasing the size limit on JavaScript and release 4.8.0 to 400 kilobytes. It makes a ton of difference. Any product people here? No.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So very helpful, and that's a little thing that tells you very tiny at the bottom of the code block that you only have 4,000 characters. All right, do you want to do this one, Josh?
Yeah, happy to.
All right, think about how you label everything.
Yeah, so when you're adopting a system like Google Analytics, really it's the whole organization that needs to be bought into the process, because a major donor might be reaching out and putting a donation link. Somebody on the social media team might be putting a link out there. So everybody kind of has to adopt the same terminology, and that really means making UTM parameters within Google Analytics 4 streamlined and consistent. So at Chorus, what we actually did is we put together a document that defines all the different UTM variables that you can put in, including some things like, max 40 characters for an event name, max 100 characters for event parameters, etc., and making sure that everybody followed the same set of rules. So, creating some kind of internal document to keep everything simple is really what we recommend here.
It's a pretty complex topic once you start looking into GA4, but there's this concept of cardinality, and if you have too many variables, Google GA4 will just merge them all together. So it's really good to keep everything as consistent and same as possible. That's why we recommend standardization, like Josh was saying, like make sure that things are just called facebook.com and not fb.com or m.facebook.com. And to try to keep everything lowercase is incredibly helpful. And it takes a lot of work, I think, to train your whole team to keep consistent in this manner, but it does pay off. As an example, on the screen in that red box, I've got one purchase event with a capital P, and I've got one with a lowercase p. So right there, you're getting some inconsistent data quality. So imagine having to clean that up every month before you submit it to your VP. Just going to be a pain in the butt, right? And then Josh touched on this really briefly, but there are some max character limits on the event names and event parameters, among other things. Now, an example of where that might be is if you're using your internal page name as the item name for a purchase conversion on GA4, the name of the page, your page name has to be 100 characters or less. So that's an example where it says this is an example event parameter. It seems like a lot of characters there, but I've seen a few clients that have very long internal page names. So something to consider is your naming conventions, how long everything's going to be, and how easy it is for you to understand what that is once you get it into GA4. All right, tip and trick, when in doubt, use GA4 search. So at the top of all the GA4 screens, there's this nice search box that says try searching for something or other. This is a really great tool to help you find the things that you're looking for, especially with GA4 being a new platform and people not really knowing where exactly the same reports are. Don't spend all your time just poking around at different things. Go into the search bar and say, I'm looking for purchase conversions, or I'm looking for my page views, or something like that, and it'll help drive you there a lot quicker than hunting and pecking. Down below, I'm not going to get too into it, but there's two types of reporting: custom reports and explorations. They have some pros and cons. It's a little bit complex to talk about, but I'm happy to go into a little bit more detail. Also, I think that one of the QR codes also goes there on the page. You want to talk about your symbolic giving?
Yeah, symbolic giving. So this is our Gifts of Love website. We can, because it mimics an e-commerce experience, right? You have an item, you put it in your checkout cart, then you go check out, and there's kind of multiple steps in that cart process. We can use Google Analytics 4 to check or to track those different actions. So there's a lot more visibility that you can get into a user's journey rather than just a donation form. But as Joe's going to speak to, there are some cons as well, some tricks that you kind of have to implement to get around some of the things the challenges that GA4 has with shopping carts.
Just like all the other audit, cleanup, and discovery work that we did, one of the things that we talked about with Chorus is what data they needed to track, what was most important and critical. And for some organizations, tracking logged in state versus logged out is not something that's possible right now in e-commerce because there's no order history, there's no saved carts, things like that. Hopefully that's going to come soon, but it's something to expect if you're setting up your own e-commerce site. Using GA4 products opens up your opens up your data to other products in the platform. You want to speak through this one?
Yeah, so we've got just a minute left. When using Google Analytics 4, it opens up the possibility to have data synced between multiple Google platforms. Looking here at Google Looker Studio, this is actually the visualization of all the work that we put into this. A nice clean dashboard where all the data is flowing in. We can filter it, we can sort it however we want. If there's one thing that I would emphasize in this presentation, it's this. You can get some really clear and clean insights because Google products work well with each other.
All right, last one. Back up all your Universal Analytics data before it's too late. So Universal Analytics is going to be fully shut down July 1st, 2024. So even though it's not writing data to the platform, you could still access it right now. But before that July 1st date, we recommend you use one of these methods on the screen to get that data out. This QR code goes to some information by Google on how to get that information out. And Josh, what were you doing with the information that you pulled? How'd you do it?
Yeah, so we used a Google Sheet tool that Google offers where it can query the Google API and pull down from your GA3, 360, or Universal Analytics all the data that you would need going back, 2, 3, 4 years. And so we have all that data housed in a Google Sheet and Excel sheets as a backup, and we can build reports on top of that. So that's how we backed up our stuff for free. We didn't have to pay anything.
All right, here's our email addresses if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, so the first question that came through is, how do you perform A/B testing in Google Analytics 4?
How do you perform A/B testing in Google Analytics 4? Well, it isn't an A/B testing platform, but you could write some data to GA4 in order to evaluate your A/B testing. The way that you would do that, potentially, just as an example, if you're testing 2 different donation forms, is you could clearly label them donation form A, donation form B, and you could evaluate the whatever your goal factor is within GA4. There are other platforms out there that are useful for A/B testing, but GA4 is kind of just the analytics part of that.
Very good. As far as, you gave kind of your top 10, but if someone is maybe running a bit behind and is looking for a good place to start, what would you recommend them starting with when it comes to GA4?
I would just throw your GA4 code in your templates. If you're using one of the out-of-the-box Engaging Networks templates, there is a nice box that you just have to paste in your script for it to be loaded into your template. Or if you're a little bit more technically adept, you could go into the HTML and add it to the head. At least start there and you'll be able to get your basic measurements like page views and clicks and scroll depth tracking for you.
And I think one thing that I've seen over the years when it comes to what was GA3 and now GA4 is you get a lot of, let's say, senior level people who want you to get to like the ultimate goal of GA4 and don't understand that it takes a very long time to build all of that foundation work. So any advice on how to talk to your senior VP of marketing who just wants you to be a level 5, GA wizard on day one?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So I think one thing I was very consistent in doing when I messaged internally to leadership was painting the picture of what GA4 was going to do for us and how it was going to answer questions, how we were going to be able to visualize things in real time or as close to real time as you can get, and how they would be able to, use a Looker Studio report without having to log in, and they could share it with people, just talking up the end result and the end picture benefits, and then kind of using that as the carrot, so to speak, so that when you come with like another update of like, okay, we finally got the Google Tag Manager implementation set, that's step 1 of 5, then you can still give them some incentive to like look forward to.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.